Our next project is going to be making an 18th century shift. The shifts were made out of linen, usually a very lightweight linen. In our case, we're going to be using more of a medium weight linen. Danielle and I each have 3 shifts made out of lightweight, but we thought that it would be nice to have a medium weight linen for the colder days. It's got gathered sleeves, and it's gathered at where the sleeve attaches to the shoulder, and at the cuff it's also gathered. And then underneath the sleeve is a gusset, just like we used on the 18th century shirt. The neckline of the shift is just a scooped neckline. It's just an oval that's open. You have to be careful when you cut that out though, because it's easy to make the opening too wide and you'll find it falling off your shoulders. I know from experience. Another feature is that you would often see in the 18th century where people did some needlework, cross stitch. They would put their initials on their shift so that they didn't get mixed up in the laundry. Something that we like to do in these modern days is we like to actually monogram or cross-stitch the date that we made our garments. So that's something I've been doing lately. One of the interesting features of the shift is that it has 2 gores sewn on both the left and the right hand side. There are 2 long triangles, and we'll be making that. In fact, after we cut the project out, that'll be the first thing that we sew. I'm going to show you just how we cut out the fabric, the sizes. The body of the shift is 45.5 inches from the bottom of the shift all the way up to the middle or the center of the shoulder, and then 45.5 inches on down to the bottom. The shift is 32 inches wide before adding the gores. Each gore you cut out 19.5 inches long with a 5-inch base to that triangle, and you'll cut 4 of those out. You'll want to cut out an oval for the neckline. It's about 12 inches or so wide. You have to adapt that to your neckline. You'll need 2 cuffs that are 1.5 inches wide by 11 inches long. You'll need 2 gussets that are 5 inches square, and then you'll need 2 sleeves that are 22 inches long and 17 inches wide. The shifts that we make are from about the 1752 time period. The sleeves on shifts of that time period are longer and wider than they are when you get farther into the century. And then finally, by the time you get toward the end of the 18th century, these sleeves are much shorter above the elbow, and they're usually narrower.
I need to cut out 2 sleeves, each 22 in length and 17 width. So I have a double layer, and I'm going to cut the 2 at once. There. I like to start the sewing by applying the gores. So here's the first one I did. You can see it's on the outside. That's why I keep putting little post-it notes to identify the inside from the out, because it's very easy to make a mistake, and before you know it, you're sewing a seam the wrong way. So that tells me this is the inside, and this is how I'm doing a 1/2 inch seam allowance to sew the gore. And that's the outside. This is the inside. I'm using a running back stitch.
Flat filling now. We're flat filling the seams of the side gores. The side gores that are down at the bottom of the shift. We've already done the seam that attaches the gore to the body of the shift. And so now we are flat filling, which is basically folding the seam allowance over and then pinning and then sewing it in place. It makes for a very strong seam. And we'll be doing a lot of flat filling on this garment. We'll be doing the side seams, be doing the sleeves and the gussets, a lot of flat filling, and it's a historical method of doing seams. The buttonholes on the shift sleeves are now finished. There are 2 on each sleeve, and the wearer will have the option of either putting a little some sleeve buttons, or they can put a little satin ribbon through the buttonholes together. Those aren't the best buttonholes I've ever made, but they'll work. Actually, this is the outside, and this is the outside of the buttonhole. The next step on the sleeves is preparing the sleeve shoulder for attaching to the body. And because it's going to be a stroke gathered sleeve attachment, I'm sewing in a parallel line of strong thread to each other, which will be cinched up to bring the fabric all into a big bunch. And I'll be showing that to you later. I've got both sleeves attached to the shift now, and I used these stroke gathers, and I think it turned out pretty good. This is the outside of the shift. Down here is the gusset, and go all the way around. So both sleeves are attached in this manner. These little dark threads are my positioning threads, so that I know exactly where the sleeve goes into the garment. This is the inside, and you can see the double row of gathering threads where I stroke gather the sleeve material together at the shoulder, so that you get that effect on the outside, that beautiful effect. And so that's what that looks like on the inside. Like I said, both sleeves are attached on the outside, and so the next step today will be to do some flat filling. You can see the two pieces of seam allowance here. I will be trimming the one and then folding the other over top of it and then sewing it down like that. And I'll be sewing that from the outside. I'll try to get some footage of that. So this is the gusset all the way around, the square gusset, which on the sleeve it looks like a diamond. And then that seam, the sleeve seam, goes all the way down to the wrist area right there. That'll all get flat filled. So that's going to be the next step. The gussets are finished on both sleeves. They're flat filled also. So here is one of the gussets. From the outside, you can see how it's flat filled. Here's the rest of the sleeve. Its seam, it's all flat filled. This is the underside of the sleeve. Right over here is the gusset, how it comes to a point, and then it continues on the underside of the sleeve. And so the sleeves are finished. Now, with the garment turned inside out, I've pinned the seam allowance. It's going to be about a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and I pin it a little bit wider than that. And I've actually started to sew that seam. And so this seam from the inside out is going to be a back stitch all the way to the end. So that's the next step. Getting ready to flat fill the long side seam. And so you see we have 2 seam allowances sticking up. And we need to shorten one of them. So you want to grab your sharpest scissors, your favorite scissors, and just cut down at least half, if not just a little bit more than half of that other seam allowance. That I'm right-handed, so I like to work this way. So we're going to remove that. And then we're going to fold over the other seam allowance. It's going to get folded over. Normally what I would do is I would go ahead and trim that entire seam allowance all the way down first. But just to show the camera what I'm doing here, I'm going to fold over the taller seam allowance. I'm going to fold it over in half like that. I hope you can see it. Fold it over in half, and then I'm going to fold the whole thing, the pair of seam allowances, folding that over, and I'm going to pin it just like that. And I'm going to repeat that all the way down the length. After trimming that one seam allowance down, we fold over the other one over top of it, and we pin it in place. I'm going to try to show you again. We fold that over and pin it in place just like this. Now, by the way, don't forget we're working from the inside of the garment. All right, I'm going to go ahead and do that all the way down the length. Okay, at this point the flat fill is all pinned from one end to the other, the entire side seam. You can see the pins. They look funny because I pinned it from the inside. Well, I've got the garment right here. I've got a good view to show you the gusset, how it turned out. So this is the square gusset. And then, if you can see it or not, this is the the seam for the under part of the sleeve, just to show you. But then at the point of the gusset, the side seam starts from that point under the armpit, and it goes all the way down to the end, down to the hem. The next step will be to stitch it. So what we do is we reach our hand in through the neck opening like that, and we feel with our fingertip, we feel the flat fill on the inside, because when we sew this thing, we want to make sure that our back stitch goes through the flat fill on the inside. So I'm going to turn it over, and I'm hoping you can see that. Here's our needle right there. This is a straight pin for the flat fill. We can actually remove that right now. It's now in the way. So we'll get rid of that. And that's our needle. We want that needle to be on the flat fill, just like that. Not over here where there isn't a flat fill. So we turn it back over. I'm trying to keep this in focus. And we just continue to make this back stitch on the flat fill all the way down the length of the garment. It's going to be a long stitch. You'll have to get new thread a couple times. Just put your podcast on and your cup of tea nearby and have fun. This is what I enjoy about hand sewing. Okay, let's get going. Here's a view of the finished gores from the outside of the shift. Turned out pretty good. And I wanted to flip it over to show you the inside, which is flat filled. I'll try to come in closer. This is a little closer view of the flat filling from the inside. We showed you how to do that. The next step then that we're working on is to hem the bottom of the shift. This is the raw edge of the garment. And here's where I've started hemming. It's just a simple fold over, hem that I use a back stitch in. Very simple. It's a long way around, so it's another one of those examples where you just want to get comfortable and just start sewing and enjoy the process. So we'll go ahead and hem the garment and then work on the neckline after that. The next step then is to hem the neckline opening. So that's this all the way around, goes all the way around the garment at the neckline, like I said, where the head comes through. And we're going to just be folding that under, and we'll pin it, fold it again probably, and put a little stitch in there. I'm probably going to use another back stitch. I think that the originals would have used a slip stitch. I don't really care that much how the slip stitch looks in this instance, so I'll probably be using a back stitch. So I'll show you once again once we get going. We're almost done sewing the neck opening. We're using those back stitches, and I'll do a couple of these right here. Take that, that's the last pin to come out. And then I have to address something else. We have all of the raw seams covered now, except for the ones where the sleeves attach to the shoulder. So that'll be the next part that we have to address. And then that'll be it for the shift. We'll be all done. Let me go ahead and finish this, and we'll get back to you. Alright, the neck opening is now complete. So now I'm going to show you that other problem that we're going to take care of. Okay, here we go. This is the sleeve, and it attaches to the body. We've got, you'll notice this double row of stitches for the stroke gathering, and this is the seam allowance that's left over that we have to take care of. We have to, and normally you would flat fill that, but we can't. We just can't flat fill that with all those gathers. So I'm going to show you the technique that they used in the 18th century. I have before us here one of my shirts to show you how we solve that problem on a shirt. Shirts and shifts are basically the same, especially where the sleeve connects to the body. Basically what you do is you cut a strip of fabric about 2 inches wide, fold over the edges I should say, and you sew that in place. It goes all the way around, and it ends up down near the tip of the gusset. Right there. There's one, and here's the other end. This is the tip of the gusset. So that's what we're going to do next. I'm going to go off and cut a couple pieces of fabric. There's the seam allowance for where the sleeve attaches to the body of the shift, and you can see the extra seam allowance sticking up, which is very difficult to flat fill, especially given that it's all gathered. So like I talked about a little bit earlier, our solution is to put a band of fabric right here. I'll show you that next. What I do is I cut a piece of the same fabric 2 inches wide, and I make it about 26 or 28 inches long. I will be cutting off a little bit off of each end, which I'll explain later. And then after I've cut the fabric, I bend over the edges about 1/4 of an inch or so. I don't measure it, I just bend it over, and then I iron it flat, and when I iron the entire band. This doesn't really have a technical name. I've seen it called shoulder piece. So anyway, we just go ahead and use them, and then this piece of fabric is going to be sewn right over top of that seam allowance like that. I've already done this shoulder piece, and the shoulder strap, or whatever you want to call it. It's already sewn on, and it gets sewn on the inside. And then I'll show you next where it comes together at the gusset. This is where the actual shoulder piece, shoulder strap, comes together at the bottom of the armpit, the bottom of the gusset. It's, like Danielle said, it's a diamond-shaped gusset, and it comes together, and then there's always a little bit of fabric that you can just trim off, tuck underneath, and sew it in place. Here it is on the outside of the garment. It's not really the cleanest look, But for structural integrity, I think it's a good idea to use these shoulder pieces. Besides, this is only underwear anyway. So we'll get on to sewing the second one on, and then that'll just about do it for this project. I'll catch up with you in a second. There is the finished shift. It's all done now. I'm only going to do one more thing, which is optional. I'm going to be putting some cross-stitch letters on the shift so that we can tell one person's from another. Danielle wears shifts in addition to me. So this is the entire shift. I think it turned out pretty good. It's made out of a little bit thicker, a little bit heavier fabric than we normally do. But we did it on purpose. Now, I zoomed in on the sleeve gusset so you could see that a little bit better. Okay, so that just about wraps it up with this project. The next thing we're going to sew is an apron. We like to wear aprons around here, and an apron is something that just about every 18th century woman wore. It protects your clothes. So that project, please stay tuned. Bye.